Here's a request that's kind of, we might say, part two of our quick tip 306, which dealt with studio lighting and how to avoid glare. But this person asked, could you address the influence of the types of lighting used and how that affects the reference photo and the paint mixture on the palette? We'll do a little bit of experimenting on this one. Well, if you watched the quick tips we did on my painting process before numbers 462 through 465, you recognize the rooster. So the rooster is just here to show you what we're going to do with our experiment of how lighting can affect the color as you're painting. Now, first of all, here are some concerns that all artists should take into consideration when they're lighting their studios. Well, our first consideration is the temperature of the light. Temperature of light is measured in kelvins, and usually the 5,000 Kelvin, 5,000 K, you will see on the indications on light bulbs or whatever. May not always be there, but if it is there, the 5,000 to 5,500 is ideal and the closest to natural light, daylight. Now, you might see the CRI, that's a color rendering index. Color rendering index of 100 is usually considered equal to sun. Bulbs that you would get would be either 80 to 100, and that is in the same range as the 5,500 Kelvin. So they put different kinds of indications on the bulbs you might buy, but that's what you want to look for. Now, that's important because if the color of the light in your studio is too warm, you're going to compensate for that and you're going to make your painting, the colors of your painting, too cool. And if the color of the light is too cool, you'll compensate for that and your painting will become too warm. Now, something else that you can take in consideration, if you're outside painting, and if you're painting in direct light, you don't have any kind of shade, chances are you're going to create a painting that's too dark. It will look right to you while you're out, but when you come inside, your colors are going to be too dark. It's because your lighting is too bright. So that's the reason outdoor painters, plein air painters, will use umbrellas or other kinds of shields, not only a shield over the painting itself, also a shield over the palette, so that you get a diffused light that's going to be closer to what we would see inside. So all those things we have to deal with. Now, the other thing is in your studio, if you have your lights too bright, too much, too strong, that same thing is going to happen. Your painting will end up being too dark because your light is too strong. And the reverse of that is true too. If your lights are too dim in your studio, chances are you'll paint your colors too bright or maybe with too much contrast. So that's why it's important to get just right. Now, in the old days, they said northern light, and a lot of artists these days will have studios that have lots of windows facing north. All right, but we don't always have days when we've got light coming through. We have weather that affects the light, and of course, during the dark, during the night, when the light there is no light inside coming through your windows, you got a problem if you don't use some sort of artificial lighting. So, while taking all that in consideration, when you light your studio, you want your lighting to be not too bright, not too dim, and at a temperature that is about 5,000 K. Just remember that. Now, another thing to consider, the color of the walls in your studio. If you have had a decorator come in and paint your walls a bright green or a bright blue or bright red, that color is going to reflect down and it's going to affect the color of your paint too. So your studio walls need to be in the neutral range. That makes a big difference in the result of your painting. Also, the clothing that you wear. Now, the way light works, or way color works, the light rays will bounce into the color, and then that color bounces out. So we have rays of that color mixed with the colors of light rays, and that bounces back onto what we're doing. So it's a better thing to have wear neutral clothing, neutral colored clothing, or clothing that doesn't have a large amount of reflective color in it. So here's a lot of things we need to consider. Now, there are two things that you might take in consideration in the terms of how much light. One is lumens. That's the amount of light that's being emitted from the source. And the other is the amount of lux, L-U-X. That's the amount of light that's bouncing from the surface. These days we have apps for our phones, and different phones have different kinds of apps. The app you want to get is just a simple light meter that measures lux, L-U-X. You don't need all the settings that photographers need for a light meter. And so you can see how that works. I've got this light meter on my phone, and then for the amount of light that's reflecting off that surface, I can read it. I've got 281, which is fine, somewhere around 280 to 320 in that area is almost ideal to not get your paintings either too dark or too light. Also, you measure that same thing on your palette. You should have the same amount of light hitting your palette as you have hitting your painting or your painting surface. So that's some, and the apps we have on our phones are something that back in the day we didn't have. So we had to find other ways to get good lighting for our studios. Now we're going to do a little experiment now, and that is to show you what can happen if the lighting in your studio is either too cool or too warm. So what you'll need to do is to tune in real close or pay real close attention to what happens in the colors of this rooster, this painting of this rooster, when we change light color. So, Roger, are you ready? Roger's going to, of the lighting we have here in our filming studio, Roger's going to change the color. Right now we've got white light that's balanced in color. So he's going to change the color so that you can see what happens. They get it warmer. Now watch what happens to this color of red. See how everything, that warmer light, now it's getting more warm. And we get it really, now it's getting cooler. Did you see the color changes very slightly, but it's significant for what color you might want. There we go, a much warmer light again. You're putting on something really, really cool, Roger. Get a really, really blue, so they can see what happens when the light is really, really too cool. Can you see that it's slightly duller? Now it gets slightly brighter. So you see how warm or how cool will change this, but you can't depend upon the colors that you use to create if you're looking at your reference, especially if your reference is on a monitor. If you're looking at a reference on your monitor, that reference then might be different from what you're seeing here. You're going to compensate what you mix here to match what you think you see on the monitor. And then when you put it under a white light, or one that's more like a natural light, you're going to see that your colors are not what you intended. Those colors are either going to be too cool or too warm. You have something really, 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 really extreme that you can throw onto it there. There we go. There we go. That is really, really cool. You see how the color changed there? You got something really, really, look at that. Okay, you see there? That light, now this could show you more of what might happen if you have your walls painted green. and you had lots of light in that studio, then that the green from those walls will reflect on. There we go again. See that? See how the color changed? You can even look at how the color changed on the palette too. So, and then we would paint what we would paint. If we're painting under a light like that, we would mix colors according to what we see on the monitor. But then when we take our painting and put it in a white light, we're going to be shocked at how that color changed, the differences it made. Now look, you see how the big difference there? This is a red light. And if you really see how it influences the color, it begins to sort of it does begin to create a totally different color than what we saw under the white light. So that's our experiment. We've taken it to extremes for you so that you can see the cool light and the warm light are subtle, and you might not notice the difference as much as you would if we threw that into extremes like we did for you here. But I hope that will answer that question. And if you just are careful how you set up the lighting in your studio, careful about the way the colors of your walls and the things around you, and careful about the clothing, the color of the clothing you wear when you're painting, then your colors in your painting and on your palette should be just right. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.